For the Journal of Operations Management, I will be guest editing a special issue on mobility, climate change and economic inequality. I will be doing this together with Susan Helper at Case Western Reserve University and David Keith at MIT. We feel that with the big societal challenges that lie in front of us, such as climate change and good jobs, operations management needs to use the skills it has to address these. So what we're looking for is papers that, within a research setting that operations management is familiar with, mobility, transportation systems, automotive vehicle production systems, researchers look towards topics, angles, issues that will address the big societal changes we're facing. I think operations management is very well situated to address this challenge because we are day-to-day customer facing. I have invited two guests from outside of the university. One is Annemarie Steenhuis, who works for the Ministry of Infrastructure and Water, and she has been involved in a top logistics project that's a great example of how government, companies and universities in this case can cooperate. And what I would like to learn from her is how can we meet each other? How can we set shared research programs? How can we agree on research outcomes? So I'm curious to learn from her how they did that in that project. The second external guest is a member of the board of the biggest Dutch trade union, FNV. And this is a party that we not traditionally involve so much in our research. Again, it sometimes happens on a project basis, but not structurally. And the person I invited, Jan Ruitenberg, is a software engineer. In his own research and work, has used computer modeling as a method. And because this is quite a core method to my discipline, I'll be very interested to learn from him. My third guest is internal. It's the Dean of the Business School, Ansgar Richter. He joined November 1st, 2019, and he is very clear on RSM having to improve its relations with its stakeholders, and stakeholders beyond traditional companies. So to start off our conversation, operations management has been increasingly criticized for studying smaller and smaller problems in increasingly sophisticated ways. And so what we try to do in this special issue is provide some ideas on topics and questions that academics are currently not addressing that you think should be addressed if we think about the big societal challenges such as inequality and climate change. And I wanted to start with Annemarie because you work in a project that combines government, universities and companies. And the first question I would have is, how did you get these parties to meet and sit at the same table?
Well, maybe to start to explain that the top sector structure is established by the Dutch Ministry of Economic Affairs back in 2011. And back then, the focus was really to maximize economic potential of the sector. But in recent years, there has been a shift towards more societal goals. But what you see within that structure, there's a very good dynamic between all three different parties. So in various meetings, we have knowledge institutions, government, and businesses working together on issues like digitalization or sustainability.
Jan, does the Dutch Federation of Trade Unions have similar examples where you work with other institutions in the Netherlands?
I think in the Netherlands there's always has been a very big tradition of scientists and trade unions and also companies working together. We have the socioeconomic forum where that has been a standard for a long time. And I always find this very beneficial because you have three very different parties thinking with their own mind about issues.
Because if you look at the top journals, often return on investment, financial bottom line, performance metrics play an important role in the research that we conduct. Do you think we're moving away from that?
I think we're beginning to move away from that, not only here in the school, but more broadly in academia.
So Annemarie, when you start designing a project, how do you make sure that the company equally commits to an academic goal or the university equally commits to a sustainability goal?
we are really looking to find the common ground. And in our meetings, there's a lot of discussion. The people from university are really like focusing on the academic goal, whereas the ministry is always saying, what is the broader relevance? How can we make this applicable to multiple companies? So it takes time, I think, but to create those spaces where people talk to each other is very helpful and necessary.
So Jan, if you go back to the project you mentioned, that on construction sites, having different languages spoken actually may increase accidents to happen. How do you get the different interests aligned in such a setting?
So at the start, there's alignment on the main goal, and the differences are much more at implementation. So once you're finished with your research and you concluded that language is that it's important that everybody speaks the language, then suddenly you go into practice, and then you see that some companies really steer on having a lot of people from different countries looking for the cheapest labor, sometimes having very short contracts, people who are only 3 months in the country, and they are very much steering on a financial benefit. What's important role for science there is, for me, is that scientists at that moment speak out. Specifically in the Netherlands, like we should be good in innovation, and we should be good in high-paid jobs, and just going for cheaper and cheaper labor is not what is going to make the Netherlands stronger in the long term. But for a specific company, it might be the way to go in that minute of time. It can go two ways. Either companies keep fighting with each other for the cheapest labor, or companies become more clear rules, right? So whether it's environmental rules or rules about employer rights. If you fight back, then we go the other way around, right? Because if one company sets a goal and that standard, then you can say to the other companies, that's where you need to be as well. And that's where government comes into play, because government at a certain point can say, okay, this is our new standard about safety, or our new standard about environmental rules.
Right, and when you say university taking a long-term perspective may improve that, maybe you can comment on that. Do you see a role for us here?
Absolutely, but I think we should be more concerned with value creation than with value appropriation, right? So more the question of how do we create long-term value for all the stakeholders involved, rather than with who earns or appropriates or benefits from these values, because then we take actually a much broader perspective, and we benefit a wider group of potential stakeholders.
So then one of the challenges that many researchers face is research design. And then I want to ask Jan, so you went from computer modeling to applying this to a setting that directly leads to better jobs. And without explaining it in detail, could you give some advice to people who have very mathematically based methods, how they can reframe or rethink or take a different angle on their research to achieve what you did?
I did computational physics, and at the end of that I wanted to do something which was much broader applied. And I started working for a company developing software, and I was like, oh, I'm going to change the world for better reasons. And the hard thing you find is that even if you make something great, so I worked on models which are a lot about safety on the job market, but they can be used in two ways, right? So they can be used to absolutely increase safety. They can also be used to use them in such a way that you do the minimum required by the law when it comes to safety. What I find, which are two things for me, that one of the things that I've really recognized is what you're saying. A lot of has to do with intrinsic power, right? So that you as a scientist, you can choose what you make important, yes or no. And one of the examples which really triggers me is in Volkswagen, we had the software scandal where they use software to skip regulations, basically. And I'm always thinking about the technical guy who did it, right? There's a software guy just like me who wrote that software, probably knowing what it was doing. And there's another part for me which is very important in this on a personal level, and that is that you need to have the power to say no to your boss, right? You need to be empowered to say to your Volkswagen, and whether, in science you don't have a direct boss, but you might have the financiers of your research.
And do you think academic research can contribute there?
I think you have a very, very important role. Also, one of the like also in setting the goals, right, and showing businesses what is possible, and we as a union, we are not objective, right? We are there to support our members, and with scientists have this objectivity about whether things are good or bad.
Right, and Annemarie, do you select partners on intrinsic motivation or ethical standards?
Not on that standard, but we have sustainable goals are very important for us. So at this moment we actually have 2 goals. So either economic contribution of or sustainable goals. So
right.
And I'm thinking about one of the projects we are doing at the top sector. That project attracts companies from abroad to come here to the Netherlands for logistic activities. And we are now doing an evaluation to can we attract all companies, or should we just pick the ones that contribute to our sustainable goals?
So if we move on to disseminating and implementing research findings, and particularly academic research findings, do we have a task there to do more than just a top publication?
Yes, absolutely. I think, we need to find good ways of reaching out to other groups and not only disseminate research in new ways, but also involve partners, both corporate and non-corporate partners, in the first place, in asking the right questions and in the process of addressing those questions as well. Obviously, as an academic institution, our genuine task is original knowledge creation, but we are not doing a good job at that if we do this just on our own. I would like to see much more collaborative forms of knowledge creation and then of knowledge dissemination as well.
That in the top sector we really think the dissemination of results is important. We even make it obligatory to hand in a proposal to make a reservation in the budget.
So then maybe I can look at the 2 of you and ask you, what are the topics and questions that come up in your work that we are not addressing? What are you missing? What are we not looking at?
One of the main things they said there, that autonomy on any level, whether it's a bus driver or a teacher or a scientist, is one of the key things which makes good companies. So when you make bus time travels so tight that a bus driver cannot go to the loo anymore, right? Then you take away his autonomy. But because bus companies, they compete with each other. And there's only one thing they can compete on, and it's not cheaper buses, right? All the buses are probably the same price. So why do they compete on tighter and tighter and tighter schedules? And what do? You let autonomy of the bus driver go. And I'm very interested in, can we start valuing this autonomy in a similar way as we start valuing the profits of a bus company? Right, as a society, but also as a company.
Yeah, so those are 2 great examples. Do you have something else that comes to mind? Because it's very inspiring for us to see additional angles on topics that we may be studying already, we may be having data on scheduling already, but not have taken this angle of the autonomy.
The main challenge is to reach all the companies. We did a lot of projects with leadership firms, and there are a lot of innovation. There is already a lot of innovation possible, but how to reach the small and medium-sized businesses?
There have been a lot of talks about getting away from regulations so that businesses would have greater opportunities to develop. And I'm very curious to see where the actual balance lies if you look at this scientifically. There also has been research showing that the more people you have in permanent contracts, the more it leads to innovation. This also applies to the question you said. It's not only about the short-time benefit, but it's also about the future of your company, the future of your country.
To go back to the final questions, to inspire people who want to submit something to this special issue. Do we study everything? Is it only in dissemination? Do we miss topics, questions? Are there things that maybe you feel that more of our colleagues should be looking into?
I mean, I know that one of the topics of the special issue is also the notion of inequality. And I take that as one example, and I'm sure there are other examples as well. But I think we have a role to link the topic of societal inequality with the topic of intra-organizational inequality as well, right? Our career, our incentive structures, and I'm not talking about academia here, but in organizations in general, see how that is related to the perpetuation of inequality in society.
And let's create more tables like this where people from different angles talk to each other about important questions, because we need each other, especially in the topics we discussed today.